Now I will turn the podium to our scientist, our professor from University of Minnesota, Professor Lu.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, this is Kangjie Lu, and I will also share something about phishing. And I prepared some slides. All right, and before I move to the details, I also have a comment for Jane's story and also the tips from Jacob. And this reminded me of one important security principle called the privilege separation. In fact, using a password manager is actually a violation of this principle because you actually centralize all these privileges in a single manager. Right? Once attackers break this manager, then basically many other things are broken. Right? And also, Jacob mentioned some tips like using different passwords, using two-factor authentication. These are actually examples of this principle, right? Privilege separation. So keep this important principle in mind, right? Then I will also talk about phishing attacks. Although Jacob mentioned the phishing, but in my slides, I will talk about more advanced phishing attacks. And I chose this topic because phishing attacks are so popular today, and they are so critical, and the outcomes could be serious. All right, so I think that people in Minnesota love phishing, right? And you can see there are many phishing rules, but they share one common thing: they are artificial, they are fake. Right? And the anglers may try to learn the habits of fishes. Right? For example, in the fall, fishes are chasing beta fishes, like a small shade. So lures that look like some shade would be more effective, like this jackfish. Okay, but anyway, they are fake. And sometimes these fish cannot distinguish these fake lures from real beta fish. All right, so phishing attacks are quite popular today on the internet. It's a form of cybercrime. And the difference between phishing and the scam is that phishing has a malicious intent. Okay, their goal is to break something or to lure some information from you. Okay. So typically, attackers send some fake information that looks legitimate, and their goals are malicious. And this is an example of email phishing. As you can see, the attacker will first send an email to the victim, and then the victim could click some links in the email or click the attachment in the email, and then this will redirect the victim to some websites, and the victim may provide some information such as a bank account, and this information will be collected and abused by the attacker. This is a typical process of a phishing attack using emails. And actually, besides emails, there are many other channels that attackers may use to send this information to you, like phones and also web pages. And basically anything you may receive information could contain some phishing information. And then I will talk about some advanced phishing attacks using some cases. All right, so this is a email phishing attack against a PayPal account. So you can see this is actually not difficult to tell. This is probably a phishing attack. Right? For example, if you click this PayPal service, you will figure out that the actual email address is not correct, okay? And you can see here, paper.cc, right? The extension cc is not the official one. The official one should be .com. And the images are not clear, they are fuzzy. And you can see this greeting is quite general, okay? My name is not mentioned here. And then in the end, the email asked me to click something. And this will redirect me to some malicious websites. And maybe I will provide my credentials, which would be collected and abused. Okay, so this case is actually not hard to tell that this is probably a phishing attack. Okay, how about this one? Is this better? And you can see this is a real email address from PayPal company, right? PayPal.com. Okay, there's no problem with this email address. And then they have my correct name, okay? And it's not a general greeting. Okay, so things are looking good. So do you think this is a real email, not a phishing email?
It looked like the real email.
Yeah.
Look like
so likely,
PayPal.
Yeah, likely you will believe, yeah, this is really from PayPal company, not from attacker, right? But actually, this can still be a phishing email. Okay. The problem is that there's a technique, attack technique called email address spoofing. Attackers can manipulate the email addresses, change these email addresses they want. Okay. So actually, when you are sending out an email, your email is wrapped as a package, right? It's a text package, right? The email address from where is just a line in this package, and attackers can just change it to anything they want, right? And then when this email is sent to the target, the fake, the malicious email address will be shown to the victim. So what you see may not be what you really get. Okay, this is one message I want to convey. All right, and in fact, email-based phishing attacks are really common today. For example, there are 3.1 billion spoofing emails sent per day. And majority of the cyber attacks start with email message. Okay, so do not assume that as long as the email address looks good, you are receiving a good email. This may not be true, okay? Because attackers may spoof the email address. And if you want to learn more details about how this email address spoofing works, you can Google it and you will find more scary details. All right. And overall, phishing is also common today, right? When you go to a new website, right, you probably don't want to provide your information again and again, and you will likely to choose to use Facebook or Google to sign up this new website, right? And then you will click this link, and a small window will be popped up, right? The problem here is that you never know if this small window is actually from Facebook or Google. They could be a fake small window from this malicious website. And once you provide your information, this information is collected by the attackers. Okay, and also personalized or targeted phishing is popular today, right? They will collect as much information as possible about you, right? For example, the organizer mentioned this USPS case, right? The attacker actually knows someone is using this USPS information, right? This is some very dedicated information about you. And when you receive this information, you you probably would believe that this is likely from USPS and you may trust it, okay? And also not just that the links could be malicious, the attachments can also be malicious, right? When you click these attachments in an email, they can ask you to provide more information, or these attachments could trigger some malware or trigger some vulnerabilities in the corresponding software, such as Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, right? So these attachment, these Office files are some macro codes, right? When you click them, this code are running in your local machine, and this can be dangerous, okay? So keep this in mind. Clicking the attachment can also be dangerous. All right, and this is actually a real case. I happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I received a phone call, and you can see, so my phone has this feature. It will suggest like what is the one calling. So it shows this is county sheriffs, right? And you can also see this phone number. It's actually a valid phone number from this sheriff office. And I also Googled it, and I can see it actually matches with this real number, okay? And then I picked up this phone, and they asked me, they said my SSN is broken and someone is abusing my SSN. And then they said they need to protect my SSN and ask me to provide my personal information. And then I realized this could be potentially a scam or a phishing attack. So I hang up and I separately called this office to confirm if this is true. And they told me that this is not true. They didn't find any problem with my SSN. So this is actually from an attacker. And then you may be confused, right? This phone number is actually valid. It's actually from this sheriff's office, right? So how could this happen? Right? So this is similar to this email spoofing attack. Attackers can also spoof these phone numbers, okay? And if you want to know more detail, you can search phone ID spoofing, okay? So this is another example of what you see may not be what you get. Okay, people can spoof this information. All right, and this is also another interesting case. Like 10 years ago, some scammers from Nigeria, they claimed that they are from Nigeria, okay? And why would they do that? Okay, because people at that moment, more than 50% of scams were from Nigeria, okay? Why would these scammers claim that they are from Nigeria? Any idea?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so the answer is that they want to minimize their cost, right? This is used as a test against the victims, right? If people realize that, okay, because this is from Nigeria and this is likely a scam, the scammers, the attackers know, okay, I'm targeting a smart people, I'm targeting a person who may have known these kind of attacks. Then I probably have to give up this victim, right? So this is used as a strategy to filter out some victims who respond but ultimately don't pay, okay? So you can see these scammers are actually quite smart. Right? They are evolving. They are trying different kinds of strategies to improve their success rate, but also minimize their their cost. All right, so next I will be discussing about why is avoiding phishing attacks so hard. Okay, and unfortunately, the answer is that we cannot completely avoid a phishing attack. This is an arms race. Okay, there are some reasons. First, only internet, right? People are talking to each other remotely. Okay, we never know who we are really talking to, right? They are untrusted, and it's not easy to verify the identity of the remote party. And humans can be vulnerable because we have emotions, and this can be abused by phishing attacks. And phishing attacks are inherently dynamic. Okay, they are evolving. And these attacks are becoming more and more advanced. Okay. Once you have one defense or one detection, the attackers can also improve the attacks to bypass your detection, right? And as a result, automated detection or warnings suffer a lot from false positives, and as users may not use this kind of detection. And on the other hand, right, more and more advanced techniques are proposed, such as the Tor. Not sure if you know this one. Tor is a anonymity technique, right, to hide your identity. This is a defense mechanism, right? And also, I believe you know Bitcoin, right? And these are techniques proposed for good purposes, but they could be abused by attackers, right? For example, attackers may choose to use Bitcoin to ask you to pay them some money, and they cannot trace back to who you are paying to, right? Because the identity cannot be revealed if you use Bitcoin. And also, AI techniques are abused by attackers to select particularly vulnerable targets. Okay? So there are many other reasons, but in general, the short answer is phishing attack is really hard to avoid. And what we can do? Okay, some suggestions I summarized. Right. The most important thing is improve our awareness of these phishing attacks. Okay, for example, do not assume that if the phone numbers or email addresses are correct, then they are not a phishing attack. Do not assume that they can still be phishing attacks. Okay, and be always cautious, especially when you are asked to provide personal information. Whenever you're asked to provide something, remind yourself of this Jane's story, okay? And at least you should check the spelling, the URL, or warnings from your browsers. And also try to avoid using some random websites or apps, okay? If some websites or apps are less reputable, they are less used, right? Try to not register on these websites or install these apps. Okay, they could be collecting your personal information and use them for phishing attacks. Okay, and we need to continuously train ourselves because phishing attacks are dynamic. They are evolving, right? And if you suspect that it might not be a phishing attack, you can try to find out the official authentic numbers separately and contact them, right? For example, in my the phone call from the sheriff office, right? Because I saw this phone number is correct, so I I believe that this might not be a phishing attack. In this case, what can I do? I can go to, I can try to find their phone numbers online using, for example, Google, and I can proactively call them to verify if this is true or not. Okay. And if you know this is a phishing attack, then you should stop there and potentially report it, right? And finally, I have 2 messages. Okay, so keep this in mind. What you receive may not be what you get. Okay, especially when you're passively receiving information, right? This information may not be correct. And try to independently identify the correct information and contact the authentic parties. Okay, yeah, this concludes my talk. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And those are very good information. And just like Jin and Jacob, they have, gave it to us. Those, in the end, they all have a good methodology and method to prevent us from become the victim. So now let's start the QA session, and any questions from the audience. I think I know Jun is online, and Professor online, and Jacob is online too. So any questions? I can look up I think there was some question posted on in the earlier. But those are specific questions. So one of the questions I'm not sure who you guys can answer is does it use for the 2 factors authenticator is secure enough? Jacob, I think you mentioned this. You talk about 2-factor and the multi-factors. Is that a 2-factor authenticator good enough? Jacob?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I mean, 2-factor is a start. I would say you should always try to get as much security as you possibly can. And because there are places that now are allowing multi-factor authentication, I don't know, I would hesitate to say that 2-factor is enough. So I would say in any case that you can actually get to multi-factor authentication, always do that. If you have more options than just only using a password and like a one-time token or something like that, if you can add something to that, that's always going to be beneficial. The more steps that you add will at the very least delay how the kinds of things that a bad actor can do. Now, as to whether or not it's enough, I would generally say no, but that's kind of where we are at this point in time.
Yep, I understand there is a competition, right? It's a competition between what tool we have and what the tool of the hackers they have, right? Okay, I think there are another questions. Actually, Alan Wang just asked a question: is will face recognition or fingerprint replace the password in the future? Anybody? Professor, you want to answer the question?
Sure, I can add a comment on this. So these are cool features. They are quite convenient, but in terms of security, there are some concerns. And the most important one is that once you lost your Face ID or fingerprints, there's no way you can reset it. Okay, you will lose it forever because you can't just reset your fingerprints, right? And because of that, it's your decision if you want to use it or not. But for this particular question, I don't think they will completely replace the traditional passwords because of these concerns.
Okay, let me ask you a question with that, try to follow up with what you just said, Professor. Mm-hmm. Will someone, well, I mean, the hackers or scammers, so they can spoof your face?
Yeah, this is also a problem, another concern. right? They can also collect your fingerprints because you will likely touch something like some glasses, right? These can be collected.
So they
And,
basically they can spoof your spoof your face and spoof your fingerprint, right?
yeah, that's possible, especially because there's always a usability and a security trade-off, right? To make this a face ID and a fingerprint-based authentication usable, they need to make this authentication more flexible. They need to accept some potential vibrations and some small differences will be accepted to make this authentication more usable.
Okay. All right. Next question is what are some trustworthy brand for the physical security keys? I'm not sure who can answer the question. Jacob, do you have the answer for that question?
And there's a lot of different types of brands. I've heard of people having good success with Duo tokens, but I've personally had more. I've never had a problem with Duo tokens, but nowadays I've kind of started sticking to RSA tokens instead. So those are probably two tokens that you can at least look into at this point.
Yep, I use RSA tokens. It works. So, okay. Yeah, my employer is financial business. So, okay. The next question is a security question. Oh, this is actually for the multi-factor authentication. Is security question and the answers are good enough as a secondary factor? Jacob, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I can go ahead. I would argue that it's not, but I would also kind of try to think of it less as, from a security standpoint, instead of trying to think of it as good enough, it's kind of think about how far can we go while still being usable and accessible, right? So rather than try to focus on, picking just one type of authentication or like multi-factor authentication method, I guess if you were to choose only one, I personally would probably go with like an RSA token, but try to think of it more as how much more can I continue to add before it becomes too cumbersome for me to actually use these tools. Try to think of it like that. And if you start thinking of security like that, that's when you start getting into about as secure as you can be in our current society with our current technologies.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, I also have one comment for the security questions. I think that this may not be a good security solution because two things. First, the security questions, the answers could be inferred by attackers. They can try to learn this kind of information through your social media accounts or your friends, right? So the answers could be inferred. So it may not be really secure. Second, I think that this is not a very usable mechanism, and users had a hard time to provide these very unique answers. So sometimes they just provide some very general answers and always select these three security questions. So, and because of that, these kind of mechanisms are less secured. Yeah. So I would agree with Jacob. An RSA token or phone-based two-factor authentication would be better.
So, the professor, can you answer the next question? Is security questions, are the security questions really safe? Because it's asking too much of your privacy.
Yes, this is actually a good point that the websites could potentially collect your personal information, and especially when you are registering on some random, not a reputable websites. This is a potential privacy concern. And I was talking about the security concerns regarding this mechanism. Right? Your answer could also be indirectly inferred based on other channels such as social media accounts, your friends.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the answer. Jacob, do you have any comment on that, or?
No, I think the answer was actually really good. I wouldn't really add anything to it at this point.
Okay. All right. Apparently nowadays we got too many passwords, too many accounts, right? I think earlier on, Jun was talking about he was using the Google password too, right? Are there any better password tool? And I think Professor, you also mentioned that I think is the Google tool actually against some the principle you're recommending, right? Do you want to elaborate on that, or?
So personally, I never used the password manager, and the major reason is because if I use it, I actually rely my security, my privacy on this single app, and it's too dangerous. So, but on the other hand, as you probably have experienced, we have too many accounts, too many passwords.
Hard to remember.
So I don't have a good solution, and this is actually an open research problem. People are still working on it, right? So at least you can try to categorize your accounts, right? For example, for bank-related accounts, you try to use complicated passwords. And if you are registering on some small websites, you can use a different password. Yeah. So try to separate the passwords you use for different kinds of accounts. Yeah.
Okay, Jacob, do you have any recommendation on using the password manager, or do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a difficult choice you have to make because, right, I mean, we kind of talked about it. You run into the problem of, in order to stay secure, you need to have different passwords, but how do you remember all those secure passwords, especially if you're trying to make secure ones? I don't know if password managers are the right solution personally. Because a password manager is basically a single point of failure, and that's what we want to kind of prevent, right? If somebody gets access to your password manager, theoretically they have access to all the accounts that are in your password manager, and that could be devastating. In terms of recommendations, I can't really give a whole lot, but one thing I would consider at least giving people the idea of is that if you do plan on using a password manager, consider not putting incredibly important passwords or services into that account. Say, for instance, maybe you're not going to put any sort of services that require banking information or very sensitive information like social security numbers, or any services that allow you to make purchases. But then again, that kind of starts adding into, well, what can you even put into a password manager at that point? So I honestly don't have a real solution to that kind of thing, that kind of problem. And I think that we're going to see, like in the next couple of years, that might become a big focus to try to figure out how can we actually solve this problem.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So Jun, are you online? Can you hear us? And I know you earlier on when you share your personal story, you were actually make some recommendations. Do you want to say more on that? How should we handle our password? Jun, can you hear me?
Sorry, I'm outside my house, and can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. So yeah, as far as the password, I hear the professor's recommendation. I do agree with the security principle and shouldn't keep all the eggs into one basket. However, I don't have a best solution. I did recommend one, for the most important ones. So I read on the paper. I don't keep in the software copy. So if you do keep the software copy or even the write on the paper, and please use some algorithm, and they don't put all the real plain text password on there. So, and that probably can make a little bit safer, but it is a trade-off, and there is no best solution at this moment. And yeah, that's what I handled today. I'm going to share my the doc with you guys so you can distribute to the audience. And there's no password manager right now. I can really call trust, but I said I use LastPass for some of online shopping only. So for those ones, and I have to enforce to use the 2FA. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, you know, there's a Harry's song. He said, "Hey, I built my own mechanism into my password generation. So each password is different, but I know without look at them for each use." I think Jim, that's actually just you know, I think in line what you're just recommending. You know, for me, I don't use the same password each account. Actually, in my password, even though I write down the password on the file, but there's some part of the password not written down. It's only in my memory, and I did share with my wife, my daughter, you know, whatever. I think that could be another strategy too. So, okay, let me see if there's someone have another question. Oh, okay, all right. I think we're almost 2 minutes to the 12:30. I think if we have to conclude this event, and I will say thank you to Professor Lu and Jacob from our FBI and Jim for their sharing their stories and their insight in what is cybercrime and how we can prevent from becoming the victim of those crimes. Okay, all right. I think yeah, we can conclude this meeting and this forum, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Yep.